Eagles are the sound of the American dream and what sometimes goes wrong with it.
Eagles were a bunch of country rockers with their eye on the main prize.
Eagles are one of the biggest American bands of all time, encapsulating that Southern California rock sound.
One of the things about the Eagles, perhaps why they had such a romantic view of the west coast of America, is that none of them actually came from there.
Don Henley was born in Gilmer, Texas in 1947.
Don Henley grew up in an American football culture, but he was never quite good enough. He didn't really have the physique, and instead he gravitated towards music.
In 1948, Glenn Frey was born in Detroit, Michigan.
It was pretty obvious from early on that Glenn Frey was a talented multi-instrumentalist. At age 5, he was playing piano. By age 10, he was playing guitar, and he ended up getting involved at quite an early age in the Detroit rock scene.
Randy Meisner came from Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
His parents were both sharecroppers, and by the time he was 19, Randy Meisner was married and had a child.
He played guitar from a young age as well, from the age of 10, but later one of his teachers suggested he switch to bass guitar.
Bernard Ledden was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1947.
Bernie Ledden was the son of Roman Catholic parents. I think he's one of 10.
His dad was an aerospace engineer, and they moved around a lot, and he got into bluegrass early on, kind of mastered the instruments that came along with that. All 4 members of the Eagles had been in bands previously, and they'd all kind of ended up in LA.
Don Henley was in a band that later became Shiloh and was managed by country music legend Kenny Rogers.
Glenn Frey was great mates with Bob Seger, who then became the famous son of Detroit. Together, they formed a band called Long Branch Pennywhistle, which was the earliest roots, you could say, of Eagles.
Randy Meisner's first group were Poco, who were the country rock pioneers.
He was also in Stone Canyon Band. It was one of the kind of hippie-ish, late 60s, early 70s California sound bands. Bernie Ledden, you could say, was the key influence from the country rock sound. He was in the key band Flying Burrito Brothers. He took with him that whole cosmic American sound, as they used to call it, which was a kind of expansive and open-minded take on country music.
The important thing here is that they weren't starry-eyed. They were quite cynical, and they'd all moved to Los Angeles to create the dream that they all had.
Linda Ronstadt was really key to the formation of the Eagles. Both Frey and Henley had been asked to be part of her touring band.
Her manager, John Boylan, really wanted to recruit Frey and Henley as permanent. Henley, who was very, very confident even then, said no, we'd actually like to form a band of our own. And rather than take umbrage, as lesser people might have, Linda Ronstadt and the manager thought that this was a great idea, and they helped set them on their way.
Apparently they're all taking peyote in the desert, and Bernie Ledden looked up and saw an eagle, and you can imagine it's like, look, eagle, and someone said Eagles, and I think it was then Don Henley who thought Eagles, that's a good name.
After being introduced to David Geffen, the Eagles were signed to Asylum Records, and they were told to go off and work on their sound and really gel together as a band.
They got sent off to Aspen, Colorado, and they're playing the local bar night after night.
Clint Johns was an absolutely top-level producer. He'd worked with The Who and with Led Zeppelin. And the record company suggested to him that he'd take on the Eagles.
They actually auditioned for him in Colorado and then went to London to record, and it's very much credited with establishing that kind of high-flying vocal harmonies, rock sound that became the Eagles' trademark.
Their debut album, Eagles, was released on June 1st, 1972.
Although the Eagles would refine their sound, essentially, this was it. Brilliant harmonies, super tight playing, and very, very catchy songs. which had an unmistakably country American twang.
Glyn Johns' great skill was to encourage them to sing harmony and to get these very, very tight arrangements on kind of perfect songs.
That first album by Eagles, I think, is a real kind of snapshot of that LA, California sound at the time.
Desperado, why don't you come to your senses?
Desperado, from its sleeve, was a very loose concept album, and a band dressed up as cowboys, and they sang of the cowboy lifestyle.
With the second album, Desperado, Don Henley and Glenn Frey really formed that tight writing team.
Together, it's a bit like Jagger Richards, you know, together they were taking the dynamic of the band and they were writing not just songs, but hit songs. Tequila Sunrise, you know, that's like the ultimate classic rock song. You know, it's probably playing on the radio somewhere today.
It's another tequila sunrise, staring slowly across the sky. Said goodbye.
The plan for the third album, On the Border, was to go to London and record it with Glyn Johns, like they'd done with the first two albums. This just didn't work out for them. After a few sessions, they dumped Glyn Johns, which is a very brave thing to do, and linked up with Bill Szymczyk. Bill Szymczyk was very much their man, and he would remain their man for the rest of their careers. They nicknamed him Coach, and it was a collaborative exercise. They interviewed him before they allowed him to produce them, and they said, "What do you think about harmonies? Do you like double harmonies?" And Bill Szymczyk said, "No, I want triple and quadruple harmonies."
On the Border came out in 1974 and earned the band their first #1 single for Best of My Love.
Best of my love.
The band already knew Don Felder as a really great guitarist, and they asked him to play slide guitar on A Good Day in Hell, and they were so impressed they just said, "You know what, join the band, be the fifth member."
Previously he was a friend of Bernie Leadon, and he was actually nicknamed Fingers because of his dexterity in guitar playing.
He brought a kind of heavier classic rock sound, and it was hugely successful.
There was a shift in sound with Eagles' third album, On the Border, as Henley and Frey wanted to move away from that kind of more folksy blues country sound to something a bit harder and rockier.
One of These Nights was released in June 1975 and would make them international superstars.
One of These Nights was their first American #1 album. It gave them a Grammy for Lion Eyes, and significantly, to the great joy of Henley and Frey, it wasn't a country Grammy, it was a pop rock Grammy, and you could see exactly how the immediate future was beginning to take place.
They ended up going on a world tour to promote the album, but during this time, ironically, at the peak of their success, this is when tensions within the group were starting to bubble over. Bernie Leadon was increasingly disillusioned, especially with Glenn Frey, about the direction the group was going.
He'd always had more of a connection to country and blues and rootsy music, and as the Eagles got more and more rocky and more commercial, I think it just wasn't what he wanted to be doing anymore.
It ended when Bernie Leadon poured a beer over Glenn Frey's head, and I think that's when he either gave marching orders or he marched out.
Joe Walsh was brought in to replace Leadon after he left the band.
Joe Walsh came from James Gang, and James Gang were a country funk band.
He was a loose cannon, even by the standards of the Eagles at that time, who were a collection of loose cannons. Don Henley had great misgivings about him because he didn't want anyone to disrupt the Eagles' path to glory. Once Joe Walsh started to play guitar, then a lot of those misgivings were put aside. The bottom line was that he could play.
In 1976, the Eagles released their first greatest hits compilation, which was a bunch of singles from between 1972 to 1975.
It sold 45 million records. In America, it went 29 times platinum.
By 1977, the Eagles were a global sensation, thanks to the release of their greatest hits album.
During the time of the huge success of their greatest hits album, the Eagles were actually in the studio. They were in there for about 18 months, working on the album that would eventually be released as Hotel California.
Everybody's watching you.
Hotel California is obviously a landmark of popular music. This was the Eagles at their absolute peak.
It was massive. It got them Grammy Awards, it went to #1. It was the album that really defined their career.
Johnny come lately, the new kid in town. Everybody loves you.
New Kid in Town is, there's a point at which, you know, you're the hotshot. And they realised when they wrote New Kid in Town, actually, they were huge, but there are people snapping at their heels. That line, everybody loves you, it's just this feeling that there's something rather false about it all. It's actually a very cynical song.
New Kid in Town became the third #1 for the Eagles, and then in 1977 they released what would become their signature track, Hotel California, which of course went to #1 again. It's got Felder and Walsh performing a guitar duet throughout. Felder wrote the music for the track.
It's a brilliant song because it's really about that idea of LA being this fantasy land which you can never match up to reality. It's this idea of the perfect life and this almost like everything you think you want, if you get it, you might find out that it's not what you needed. You've got to remember that by this point the band was hugely successful. So they had theoretically everything they wanted, and it's the late 70s, you know, there's a lot of excess around, a lot of drugs and promiscuity and everything else. And I think there's a kind of jaded aspect to Hotel California, which really gives it its poignancy.
Welcome to the Hotel California. Such a lovely place, such a lovely place, such a lovely place.
In a sense, the Eagles' internal problems could be summed up by Victim of Love, which was supposed to be a song that Don Felder was going to sing.
He actually recorded this, then he got taken out for a meal by the band's manager.
While he was off having dinner with Irving Azoff, who was their record company boss, Don Henley sneaked into the recording studio and overdubbed his vocals.
Apparently this was something that he never got over, and it really did kind of create a long-lasting rift between the band members. The release of Hotel California and the subsequent touring, I think, really exhausted the band. They were on the road for like 11 months.
Randy Meisner, more than any other Eagle, wasn't cut out to be a superstar. He was a very quiet man. He was extremely shy. And during the Hotel California tour, he got incredibly nervous about singing Take It to the Limit on stage. And there was one concert in Knoxville, Tennessee, where he just couldn't bring himself to sing this song.
Backstage, Glenn Fry went mad and started shouting at him, and they had a fight. That was really it. You know, then he left.
Timothy B. Schmidt was the guy who replaced Randy Meisner.
Joy of Joys, he was an Eagle who was actually a Californian. He had a lovely way with a vocal. So he brought another dimension to the Eagles.
The Long Run was their next album. It did well commercially, but obviously it couldn't follow up the staggering success of Hotel California.
Although it did sell really well, and it still earned some Grammy nominations, in terms of the critics, they got a bit of a slating for that album.
If you listen to that album, tracks like The Long Run itself, it's a fine album. It just isn't Hotel California.
It didn't have that level of just pure radio-friendly songs that you cannot get out of your head and which have some kind of purpose and meaning.
The band were due to play in Long Beach, California in 1980, and before going on stage, Fry and Felder had a falling out.
This was the famous Long Night at Long Beach, as the Eagles called it. It was a fundraiser for the Senator Alan Cranston.
They were introduced to Senator Cranston's wife. Glenn Fry decided that Don Felder hadn't been sufficiently respectful to Mrs. Cranston.
Which culminated in them spending the entire gig having a go at each other, just telling each other how they were going to fight the other one after the show.
And they did. And after that, Glenn Fry flounced out, sacked his own manager, and decided that the Eagles had come to an end.
Throughout the 80s, each member of the Eagles had varying success with solo projects, bands, movies and TV scores.
14 years after splitting up, the Eagles got back together for a new album and tour entitled Hell Freezes Over, because that's what Don Henley had said would have to happen for them all to play together again.
The catalyst for this was a country tribute album called Common Thread, which did extremely well. They spent a day taking part in the video for Travis Tritt's version of Take It Easy, and they found that despite all the water that had gone under so many bridges, they still got on.
Easy, take it easy. Don't let the sound of your own wheels drive you crazy.
The Eagles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998, and it was quite an interesting performance from them because they did 2 songs with all 7 members of the band.
Take it easy.
It was very much one of those sights you never thought you would see.
If you think about the violent and occasionally litigious history of Eagles, it's remarkable that they could be in the same room, let alone stand on the same stage.
When the Eagles were touring in 1990-2000, Don Felder was actually having an increasingly tense relationship with the rest of the group. And his particular problem was with Fry and Henley.
Fry and Henley were the principal songwriters. Don Felder was not there from the beginning. By this point, he felt that he had as much right as anyone else to A, be an Eagle, and B, have an equal split of the proceedings. So he ended up suing Fry and Henley.
They countersued him because he'd written a tell-all book.
In the end, the whole thing was settled out of court for an undisclosed fee. In 2007, they released Long Road Out of Eden, and it was the most successful album for the band in decades.
It, I think, quite effectively recreated their old sound, but gave it a new twist.
It was their 6th #1 album. It was certified 7 times platinum, and they ended up winning 2 Grammys for the album as well.
Now they had some new product to promote, the Eagles went back on the road again. They played these mammoth sets, hours and hours with an interval.
They were doing stadiums, massive arenas, huge festivals. They didn't play small venues anymore. They were a massive band.
Just too busy being fabulous. Too busy to think about it.
They showed that the market for these songs that had soundtracked so many people's lives was still buoyant.
Glenn Frey sadly passed away at the beginning of 2016. The Eagles performed a tribute to him at the Grammy Awards that year. Don Henley saying that it was a farewell to Glenn and that it was probably the last time you would see the Eagles perform together.
The surviving band members responded to Glenn Frey's death by playing Take It Easy, which I think is a very nice tribute. Not only is it one of his most famous songs, but it's one of his most positive songs.
Take it easy. Don't let the sound of your own wheels make you crazy.
Their first manager said they were a band who wanted to be a commercial success. That was their focus, and that's what they did. They wrote records that they knew would sell really well.
The Eagles' legacy is the success that they had.
150 million albums worldwide, 100 million alone in the US, the most successful rock band in US history.
The Eagles' greatest legacy was to provide the world with mellow country rock classics that put you in a good mood.
They soundtracked the lives of a substantial part of the American population.
Oh, we gotta be